'Twas the day after Christmas, and all through the house, every creature was hurtin', even the mouse. The toys were all broken, their batteries all dead. Santa passed out with some ice on his head. Wrapping and ribbons just covered the floor, while upstairs the family continued to snore. And I, in my t-shirt, new Nikes and jeans, I went to the kitchen and started to clean. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from the sink to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the curtains and threw up the sash, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a little white truck with windows so clear. The driver was smiling so lively and grand, the patch on his jacket said U.S. Postman. With a handful of bills, he grinned like a fox, then quickly stuffed them into our mailbox. Bill after bill after bill they still came, whistling and shouting, he called them by name. Now Amazon, now Wayfair, now Penny's and Kmart. Here's Macy's and Home Goods and Target and Walmart. To the tip of your limit, every store, every mall. Now charge away, charge away, charge away all. He whipped into as he whistled and finished his work. He filled up his box and turned with a jerk. He sprang to his truck and drove down the road, driving much faster with just a half load. Then I heard him exclaim as he, with great holiday cheer, enjoy what you got, you'll be paying all year. Every year when I was in full-time ministry, on the Sunday between Christmas and New Year's, I always wondered, what do I speak on? Because Christmas is over, and it seems to preach on Christmas almost seems anticlimactic, especially if you did 4 weeks of Advent. It seems anticlimactic. But on the other hand, New Year's is still a few days away, and it seems to be pushing things a little. So this week I was talking to Justin about that conundrum, and he said, you know, I would lean to an after Christmas message as opposed to a before New Year's message. So he suggested after Christmas. And so if you don't like today's message, see him. There you go. But today I would like to talk with you a little bit about after Christmas. That is, after the shepherds had gone back to the fields, and after Mary and Joseph had cleared the stable, after even the Magi went back to their homeland, what happened then? This morning I want to share with you the after Christmas story. And to do that, would you turn in your Bibles with me, please, to Luke chapter 2. I have it up here on the screen for you, but Luke chapter 2. I want to say this morning that I am not accustomed to preaching with a microphone in my hand. So if I start gesturing and you lose my voice, well, you'll have to deal with that. Luke chapter 2, beginning in verse 15, it says this. When the angels went away from them into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, let us go over to Bethlehem, and we will see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has made known to us. And they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the baby laying in a manger. And when they saw it, they made known the saying that had been told them concerning this child. And all who heard it wondered at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured up all these things in her heart, pondering them in her heart. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had seen and heard and seen, just as it has been told them. Now, the first thing I want to share with you this morning isn't very apparent in the English language, but I think it's something that Luke intended to communicate to us. So bear with me for a moment. I'm going to give you a very brief Greek lesson. Greek being the language that the New Testament was written in. In the Greek language, there are two kinds of past tense verbs. One is called the aorist past tense, and the other is called the imperfect past tense. Aorist past tense is a simple past tense. It refers to something, generally something that happened in the past at a point in time. The imperfect past tense refers to something that happened over a period of time in the past. It is an indefinite past. Let me give you a couple of examples. If I were to say to you, this week, my wife and I opened our Christmas presents on Wednesday morning, that would be an aorist past tense. It's something that happened last Wednesday at one point in time. If I were to say to you, when our kids were younger, we used to open our presents on Christmas morning, that would be an imperfect past tense because it happened at an indefinite period of time. It happened over a long period of time. Now, with that in mind, let me share with you what Paul wrote in this passage. I identified it for you up here on the screen. I marked the aorist past tenses with a red dot. Think of it as a stop sign. Think of it as a point in time. I marked the imperfect past tense with a green arrow. But let me read it to you again. And they went and with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the baby laying in a manger. When they saw it, they made known the saying that had been told them concerning this child. And all who heard it wondered at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured up all these things, pondering them in her heart. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had seen and heard and seen had been told as it had been told to them. In other words, the shepherds spoke about it for a short time. The people wondered about it for a short time. But Mary continued to treasure it up in her heart. It stayed with her. She continued to ponder it. And it seems pretty clear that that is exactly the contrast that Luke is trying to establish here. Because you'll notice in verse 19, that verse begins with the word but. And it's a word of contrast. The people wondered at it, but Mary, she treasured it in her heart. The word that Luke uses here for treasured was an intensive word. It means to remember something intentionally, to keep it close so as not to forget it. And he couples that with another word in the Greek language. It's a present participle. It is, she pondered these things. She mulled it over in her mind. It stayed with her. She continued to think about it. I don't know if it actually happened this way or not, but we learn in Luke chapter 1, verse 2, that Luke got some of his information by talking with eyewitnesses. And Luke would have had contact or would have had availability to speak with Mary. And so I just wonder if one day Luke wasn't talking to Mary, and as they came to this part of the story, she said, you know, I still think about it. I still think about it. These verses tell us something very personal that only Mary would have known. But whether or not it happened that way, one thing that Luke is making clear to us in the passage is that once Christmas was over, Mary continued to treasure it and continued to ponder it in her heart. The first insight I want to share with you then this morning is this. When Christmas was over, Mary continued to treasure it in her heart. In contrast to the people of Bethlehem, Mary kept it. This morning on December 29th, I'd like to suggest that we follow the example of Mary. Many years ago, during World War I, something very unusual happened on a battlefield in France. Some of you have probably heard this story before because it is a true story. But for those of you who never heard this, you'll hear it for the first time. World War I, of course, was known for its trench warfare. That is, the Allied forces dug trenches, a series of trenches, and they hunkered down in those. And across the battlefield, the Germans had made trenches, and they were hunkered down in those. But this year, on Christmas Eve, the Christmas ceasefire had started. And so that Christmas Eve was nice and quiet, nothing going on, just moonlight. And as the men were hunkered down in their trenches that night, they began to hear a beautiful tenor voice singing a Christmas carol. And after he finished, they heard from the other side of the battlefield a German voice singing in a beautiful baritone voice the same Christmas carol. And it was a wonderful expression of Christmas from both sides. But that's what set up things for the next day. The next day, some of the British soldiers got out of their trenches and started kicking a soccer ball around. Pretty soon, some of the German soldiers got out of their trench and they were kicking the soccer ball around. And pretty soon they started up a game. It was the Allied forces, the Brits against the Germans, and they had a soccer game in no man's land on Christmas Day. And they talked, and they said that day they all had fun. They were enjoying each other's company. They even exchanged Christmas gifts with one another. And then at the end of Christmas Day, they went back to their trenches. And the next day, fighting started again. One British soldier wrote this. He said, "The next morning, the carnage began again. With machine guns and bayonet fighting, everything was back to normal." Now, I understand that those men were under orders. I understand that they were just doing what they had to do. But I think that we would all agree what a shame it is when on Christmas it's peace, goodwill toward men, and then the day after Christmas, back to normal. And yet I suggest the same thing happens in our society. Same thing happens in the church. It may not be that violent, certainly, but the same thing happens. Before Christmas, Christmas Day, it's peace, goodwill toward men. Everybody just gets happy. And then after Christmas, it's back to normal. Let me tell you some things that happened at Elm City Church, and I know they happened here too, before Christmas. Back before Christmas, around October, November, we started collecting boxes for Operation Christmas Child. I don't know, were you guys involved in that at all? Anyway, for those of you who don't know, Operation Christmas Child, people will pack up shoe boxes with toys for kids. And Samaritan's Purse takes those shoe boxes and distributes them around the world. Hundreds of thousands of these boxes, distributes them to kids in war-torn countries, refugee kids, poor kids in our country. But they do it as an expression of Christmas cheer to these kids who don't have any other Christmas except what is coming in that shoebox. It's a good ministry. Elm City Church collected almost 200 from the area, 200 boxes to distribute to various kids in need. That was wonderful. This church, along with Elm City Church, we had a couple of weeks ago a special service called A Very Keen Christmas. And it was a great time. Justin and Albie and Mimi put together a good program and did hard work at that. And it was a nice evening, wasn't it? But it was joyful. And one of the reasons that we did that is to give an opportunity to invite friends who don't normally come to church so they can hear more about Christ. And at that meeting, you may remember, at the Redfern Center, we took up a special offering for Monadnock Family Services because they do such a good work administering to the needs of the needy in Keene. That's all great. I wouldn't change any of it. But now what? Now what? Christmas is over. We're still going to care about kids in war-torn countries? Are we still going to care about our brothers and sisters in places like Syria and Iran who are persecuted daily? Are we going to care about people who are in need? People in the Monadnock region, are we going to care about the homeless? Are we going to care about the needy? But Christmas is over. Are we still going to care about our neighbors? Trying to share the gospel of Christ with them and the love of God with them? No, because Christmas is over. Of course not. The first insight I want to share with you this morning is this. When Christmas was over, Mary continued to treasure her heart. And this morning I want to encourage us as believers in Christ to follow that example. Let it not be just business as usual. Lord, I pray that you'd help us to have Christmas be more than just a joyful day and the time that leads up to it. I pray, Father, that you'd help us to follow the example of Mary. And then finally, the second after Christmas insight I want to share with you is found a little bit later in the chapter. A little bit later in the chapter, down in verse 21, it says this. Is 8 days later, when the baby was circumcised, he was named Jesus, the name given him by the angel before he was conceived. Then it was time for the purification offering as required by the law of Moses after the birth of a child. So his parents took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. Verse 23, and they left him there in the presence of God, and God raised the child and fed him until he was around 30 years old. That's not what it says. That's not even close to what it says. Instead, it goes on in verse 39 and says, when Mary and Joseph had done everything required by the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee to their own town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong and was filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. And every year his parents went to Jerusalem at the feast of Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the feast according to the custom. In other words, Mary and Joseph raised this child. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't glorious. It wasn't magical. Instead, it was something that they did day after day, week after week, year after year. And since we know that Jesus didn't perform his first miracle until John chapter 4, at the beginning of his adult ministry, Jesus didn't do any miracles. We know that his growing up wasn't like, Joseph didn't have to go to work, and Mary didn't have to prepare meals, and diapers didn't have to be changed, or all of that. It wasn't magical. It wasn't mystical. It was mundane. Day in, day out, doing the job that God had blessed them with. After Christmas is over, after the shepherds went home, that is when the work began. The second insight I want to share with you this morning then is this. When Christmas was over, Mary and Joseph continued to serve faithfully. Day after day, year after year. This morning I understand that Mary and Joseph had a special ministry and a special situation, but in a sense, I'd suggest that what the Lord wants us to do is the same sort of thing that he asked them to do. That is, I want to remind you, God didn't call us to celebrate a warm, fuzzy holiday with a cup of hot cocoa around the Christmas tree. Instead, he called us to a life of following Jesus, a life of serving, a life of loving others, a life of following Jesus day by day, year after year, for a lifetime. That's what God wants from us after Christmas. Several years ago, Leadership magazine carried an article that really has stayed with me over the years. I'd like to read you part of the article. The article said, "To give my life for Christ appears glorious. To pour out myself for others, to pay the ultimate price of martyrdom, I'll do it. I'm ready, Lord. I'm ready, Lord, to go out in a blaze of glory." We think that giving our all to the Lord is like taking a $1,000 bill and laying it on the table. Here's my life, Lord. I'm going to give it all. But the reality for most of us is that he sends us to the bank and has us cash in the $1,000 for quarters. We go through life putting it out 25 cents here, 50 cents there. Listen to a neighbor's kid instead of saying get lost. Go to a committee meeting. Give a cup of water to a shaky old man at the nursing home. Usually giving our life to Christ isn't glorious. It's done in all those acts of love, 25 cents at a time. It would be easy to go out in a flash of glory. It's harder to live the Christian life little by little over the long haul. That's the truth. You may remember that back in the fall, this church and Elm City, we did a series called Practicing the Way of Jesus. And one thing that we learned from that is that the Christian life isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. It's growing, it's reading his word every day. It's spending time with him every day, becoming like Jesus, serving him, loving others. Now that Christmas is over, the work begins. The second insight, when Christmas was over, Mary and Joseph continued to serve faithfully, day after day, year after year. And that brings us to the big idea this morning. Now that Christmas is over, or I should say Christmas is over for another year, now what? I want to encourage you to do something. It's kind of a practical little thing, but it's to help you to remember. In our family, we tend to take our Christmas decorations down in February or something. But most normal people begin to take them down now. I want to encourage you, as a practical thing, one decoration in your house for Christmas decoration, leave it up all year. Maybe a candle in the window, maybe, but not something in the closet. Something as a subtle reminder when you see it. Follow the example of Mary. The work begins after Christmas.